the gist of this seminar. We've got an expert panel, what a difference a year makes. I'm Brad Phillips with Hagerty. I'm a business development guy in our publishing department, and I'm a lifelong Porsche enthusiast, so this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about this stuff with you. I had a question before we get to the panelists. Who came to this seminar last year at Parade in the Ozarks? Do we have any return? Yeah. So, all right, so we do have a few that have seen this, and you may have been curious about what happened to some of our predictions last year. So we will touch on that a little bit as I introduce the panel. So this is really fantastic. As we start at the anchor position over on your far side, we have Dave Kinney. Now, Dave is the publisher of the Hagerty Price Guide, lifelong car collector, really great guy. He is no stranger to these Porsche panels. We've done these together for the 356 convention. We've done them for other parades and other events all over the country. So. And
my age is exactly the same as the number of parades there are, but I haven't attended all of them.
Next down the line, we've got Rob Sass. Rob is the illustrious editor-in-chief of Porsche's Panorama magazine. And Rob has been a continuous force in Porsche writing and editorial for the New York Times, for Auto Week, for previously of our Hagerty magazine. So Rob is a pundit. He's a really interesting guy, and we're really proud to have him on this, and I'm sure you guys are honored to have him actually working for the Porsche Club of America. Nathan Murs, as we're coming back up this direction, Nathan's the owner of Columbia Valley Luxury Cars outside of Kirkland, Washington. This guy is a fountain of information, and when we first started talking to Nathan about events like this, and hey, would you like to be on our expert panel and talk about various things about Porsches, I really didn't realize how deep his knowledge goes, and it's absolutely incredible, all the technical stuff, personal anecdotes, personal experience, with almost every kind of Porsche you can imagine. So Nathan is an incredible resource for us here and a really great contributor to this process for us. And here, our first time on our panel, and no stranger to the world of Porsche, is Rae Shaffer, Business Development Manager for Porsche Classic. And Rae and I have now gotten to know each other over the past few years. Another absolutely incredible resource in the world of Porsche, great guy, loves race cars. It's just absolutely incredible to have you here joining us to talk about the various models that have made our lists up, down, and sideways this year. And thank you very much for coming. And hopefully you guys had a chance to see Rae in his seminar that really led off today on Porsche Classic and the incredible restoration facility and the process that they do for parts and all that. So I'm really hoping you guys had a chance to see that. And if not, you need to talk to Rae about his process because it's absolutely incredible. All right. So we're going to burn into this. So what a difference a year makes. So we want to talk quickly about our list from last year before we dive into what this is. So what we're going to highlight for you are the top 5 movers in our price guides from our experience that we've seen in the market that went up, that increased in value, okay? And then we're going to spend some time on the other half of this talking about the ones that had the least movement. Sometimes that means it's flat, sometimes it means it's a decrease in value. So we're going to do that. So the ones that we highlighted last year, if I remember, for 2018, the panelists, I think we said the 924S was a big deal, the 914-4, the 2-liter car, 968 coupes. Those are the ones you guys had highlighted as the cars to buy last year. And I think the values on those have all been on the move, which was good. So it was a good predicator of how the market actually went. The 912 also, I believe, was on our list last year. So we're going to talk about some of those as we move forward, but it's always interesting to see, do we have a crystal ball? Everybody wishes you had a crystal ball and you knew exactly what to buy and when to sell it. This unfortunately isn't quite that masterful, but we do our best. So let's get into it. So what a difference a year makes. Again, some have increased, others had some modest adjustments, a few have declined. One of the really interesting things about the Porsche market, they're all really good cars. And they suit a variety of lifestyles and different price points. So I think we can all agree there's kind of a butt for every seat in Porsche land. I think we've hit on that point a lot. But a few have declined in value as maybe the demand has cooled, and we'll talk about why that may be, despite them being really great cars. So these are the 5 cars that have gained the most. And you can see where it was in May of 2018 and where it is now, May of 2019. We start at the Porsche 914, we go through 924s, 968s, 326Cs, and the 74 to 77 911s. Now, one thing that's interesting to note about this is prices and increases are based on the average value of number 2 cars. Dave, you're probably the closest to this. Do you want to talk a little about what is a number 2 car to us?
Well, first, before we get into it, anybody who buys a car just because they think it's an investment is not our type of people. Buy the car because you love it, buy the car because you want to drive it, buy the car because you fit in it, buy the car because it represents what you like. Full stop. A number 2 car, number 1 car is the best in the world, we like to say, on the lawn at Pebble Beach without a blade of grass in the, in the tires. Number 2 car is that same car that maybe has been driven 1,000 or 2,000 or maybe even 5,000 miles, but has been well looked after over those 5,000 miles. There might be a repairable stone chip in it, but that's about all you're going to see in terms of a flaw. You might see a crease in the leather, but not creased leather. So it's still an exceptionally nice car. Most people walking by would think it was a new car.
Thank you, appreciate that. All right, well, let's dive in. So the first one on our list, 7076 914, 4-cylinder. Obviously taking the 914, 6 out of this. Why do you think it made the list? Who wants to tackle this one first?
I'll talk 914s. I was blessed yesterday. I got to judge at the Concours 914's chassis and engines. So that was kind of fun. I got to get in a deep dive on these. I think the thing with 914s, a couple notable items. First off, we're celebrating the 50-year anniversary of the 914 this year. So that's a big hallmark. If any of you get the opportunity to go to the Porsche Museum, I was recently there. They're doing a nice feature on the 914, including the 914-8, which is there on display. So pretty amazing opportunity. I think the thing about the 914, first and foremost, one of the things that often gets not mentioned when we go to some of these events, and I hail from Seattle, which obviously, as we know, is economically doing very well, and we see, people buying new Porsches and new Ferraris and all sorts of things, and we forget, though, to the average person who's buying a fun car, they might have a budget of $10 or $15 or $20,000. They don't necessarily have a budget of $100,000, right? They got kids' college or a new kitchen or planning for retirement. And so for a lot of people that say, okay, I've got $20,000 or $25,000 in my pocket, what can I go buy that is representative of the brand? And I think the 914 does a lot of those things. It has the traditional aesthetic. It's got the feel of a classic Porsche. Because for that same 20, maybe you'd buy a Boxster or something like that, but this has a very distinctly different experience. And for the same money, this won't even buy any kind of air-cooled 911. And so I think there's some interest there. I also think that the car's kind of coming into its own. From an aesthetic standpoint, it's 100% Porsche. I don't care what anybody says. There's some lineage and connection to Volkswagen, but it's truly Porsche. And it's a very usable car. So I know I sold an example to Mr. Sass here a couple of years ago, and if you know anything about Rob only keeps a car about 16 days on average. And I think he's had 16 months or something. So I think that's the thing with the 914. People are recognizing that. The other thing that's kind of a funny factoid about 914s we forget is they actually made twice as many 914s as they made 356s. So they weren't a particularly rare car. They're just really hard to find a good one now because, of course, years when they were worth $3,000 to $5,000.
Well, that's a good, so if you look at actually where the curve has been on this, and we say it went up 47.7% over the last year, you can tell that's exactly right. They kind of languished along at one value for a while, and then you had a big spike upwards.
Yeah.
Rob?
Yeah, no, I'll just add to what Nathan said, and I've been using my 914 on a pretty regular basis, over the summer. But it's like anything else in the Porsche world. I think values are very often predicated on things like bright colors. It seems like plaid seats in 914s are the same thing that Pepita seats are in 911s. People love the oranges, the yellows, and some of the blues and the greens and the plaid seats. I mean, not that many really interesting options in 4-cylinder 914s. So the colors and the seat fabrics make a big difference, I think.
Now, Rob, yours has some very interesting cladding along the sides, if I remember. Don't you have some special plastic or glass fiber
We're going to chat afterwards,
on the
Brad.
back?
Yeah, something that Mr. Murs failed to address before selling. It's got ABS rocker covers like so many of them, and if anybody out there has a clean set of steel rocker covers, see me after this.
Since we're talking car parts, yeah, the 914 was, I believe, 116,000 of them were made. So as you pointed out, there were quite a few of them. Over the years, it was certainly a success here in the States, and Porsche Classic does currently make about 1,700 unique parts for the 914 to help keep on there. So we can talk about those, Rob.
Yeah, and not to mention the bitchin' 50th anniversary floor mats that I need to get a set of.
Right. Really cool toolkits like you probably saw next door. But I would be remiss too not to point out that we just put an exhibit at the PEC in Atlanta of the 50th anniversary of the 914. So if you're not traveling over to Germany anytime soon and you want to see a cool display of them, we do have 8 of them in there right now, everything from the beginning all the way to the big bumper car and race car. So it's all in there. But the 914 really does cover that well, I think. And maybe there's a few of them out there that have been modified over the years, and they're kind of fun to bring them back to the state of the photo that you had up there too, because it is a good looking car. I mean, I've always liked it. It was never a problem for me.
Yeah, it really is, and I'll add something that Nathan said, and this may sound a little bit heretical, but I was researching for an article on the 914 not long ago, and I went back and I read Car and Driver's original road test of the car back in 1970, and they said this is very much, you know, an experience akin to what you would have felt in a Speedster in the late 1950s.
Right, right.
You know, and one thing I would say is if you're interested in following how car values work for different cars, 5 years ago, if we had this seminar, if somebody said 914, there'd been a few people who in the back of the room. And then 4 years ago, it was a 2-liter only. And now we're not talking about just the 2-liter cars, because there are some fantastic cars that aren't 2-liter cars. And that's kind of the way the market works. And these are approachable, they're very drivable, and they also are, you know, at a price point that a lot of people can afford. And so it's kind of an easy sell in a lot of ways that way. And it doesn't hurt that they're, you know, targa tops or removable tops. So you can get, you know, whatever feeling you want driving it. You can be boy racer with the top on, and you can be like going out, you know, on a nice sunny day. It was a very versatile car. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other piece of heresy, speaking of the removable top of the 914, is, you know, it works better than a top on a Targa. I mean, it's rigid. It seals nicely. The car's fairly quiet with it on, and you're never going to pinch your finger folding it. So.
All right, well, that's actually a really good segue to another car that I think a few people were snickering about a few years ago. As we move to the second biggest mover, 924s, 924S. We had another big jump in that, 33.2% on the curve. And I think this is a pretty interesting one. It looks like there's actually some stair steps here. So is there a, what do you think?
I'll jump in on this. I've been a 924 owner in the past. The original Audi engine car is a car that is probably very much like the 914. It had a connection with Audi and the Volkswagen Group and its development. It had an Audi engine that, you know, probably was not going to win any medals in the NVH world, but it was a really well-balanced, simple car, easy to wrench on by anyone, and I think by any standard, it's a very attractive car. It's comfortable, easy to get in and out of, and a very simple car. They tend to not rust, most of them are galvanized, so they've got that going for them. As an entry-level car, you really couldn't ask for a whole lot more. You fast forward another 10 years to the 924S, and you've got a real sleeper. You've got a car that has the 944 engine, a little bit more, slightly more complex in terms of maintenance, but a lot more performance. And the 88 is the car that's really the sleeper. It has more horsepower, and it's lighter than a 944, and it's really a delightful car. And I happen to know this because I have small kids. The 88s have rear shoulder belts. So if you've got kids, it's a viable proposition.
Interesting. And there was a big world record price set for a 924 earlier this year at your place, right? Yeah.
We had the RM Sotheby's auction at the PEC Atlanta last fall, and I believe it was the lot that followed Project Gold, which set a record for 993s. But yeah, that was
$54,000 for an Audi engine, original 924. It was a tremendous, like 11,000 mile car.
It was a beautiful example.
Yeah.
I think it was the one that was in the picture.
Yeah, it's the one on the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Minerva Blue.
Great. All right. Well, we're rolling along here. So here's another one, and one that was also on our list from last year, the 968. Now, this is a pretty special version that we've got photoed here. So you want to talk a little bit about what the differences are?
That's the Club Sport. That's the Club Sport model up there, which was never sold in the United States. It was a very, very cool example of what could be done with the 968. But as far as just a balance goes, everything you were talking about with the 924, this was the ultimate evolution of the transaxle four-cylinder car. I believe at one point in time they considered calling it the 944 S3, but realized that that didn't tell the public enough how significant the change of the car was, the update or evolution. And so, yeah, the 968, that's a wonderful car. I almost bought this is like 20 years ago. We had when I was at Brumos, there was a Tiptronic coupe that had been traded in, and I drove it for a couple of nights, and boy, that was a fun car to drive. I was surprised, actually, shifting that down here, the early Tiptronic in that car. I mean, that was really fun to drive. I really enjoyed that. Of course, the manual's even better, and they make great track cars, as I know a lot of end up there as well.
Yeah, this is emblematic of one of the things that I love about Porsche is they tend to send outgoing models off with a bang, and the 968 is the end of the line for the four-cylinder transaxle cars. Was amazing. Same way they did with the 928 GTS, and now recently with the 991 Speedster. I just, most manufacturers, when they're nearing the end of something, will slap some tape stripes on it, come up with some silly special edition and say, hey, summer sell down. But obviously not Porsche.
Yeah, the 968 is an interesting one too. I've always thought they were undervalued, mostly because if we know anything about history of what was happening with Porsche in this era, we thank God Porsche made it through this era. It was some very, very dark times with Porsche. I mean, I worked at a new Porsche dealership. In fact, the funny story I tell people, if you can imagine, I'm working in a Porsche dealership in 1992 to 1994, and these were our brands. We had some real winners. We were selling Porsche, Jaguar, Lotus, Alfa Romeo. We didn't have a hot seller on the floor, let me tell you. And we had an owner, God bless him, he would be a perfect PCA member because he was so in love with the cars, he refused to give up on the cars. And so we'd have like new inventory, thankfully not Porsche, but we'd have like Jaguars that were 5 and 6 years old that he just knew someone was gonna come by one day. And, but yeah, 968s were kind of that way, and they didn't sell well because they were so expensive at that time. And so production volumes are very, very low. And so now people are looking at it and they're saying, man, hold on, this is a really fabulous car. They're very balanced. They're a great road car. I actually considered, I don't have a 968, but I have a 944 Turbo, and of all my collection, I thought, this is the car I would drive from Seattle to Florida. They have AC that works like a GM car from the 80s, which is awesome. One good thing GM did in the 80s, AC. They've got plenty of storage space, they're comfortable, and they're a great high-speed car. They like to cruise all day at triple digits, so a great cross-country car. And so yeah, you couple that with low production and great development, and I think also the design language, implementing the design language of the outgoing 928 GTS as well as the 993. I mean, they were kind of predictive really of the 993 design language, so I think they're going to continue to go up. I think it's a strong buy.
Yeah, no, and to basically echo what you said, I mean, the production volumes, I don't have the numbers committed to memory, but they're shockingly low. When you go back and look at them, if you look at production numbers for manual transmission coupes by the year, does it ever exceed like 2,000 for North America or something?
Never.
I mean, yeah, and again, it's another situation. I hate to keep harping on color, but the whole Rainbow project is still fresh in my head. But they were available in some really terrific colors, but in extremely low, mint green, Riviera blue, speed yellow. I mean, those cars are what, in the single digits in terms of
Single digits,
yeah.
That car in that picture is a Club Sport, and that was at the RM sale in Germany here a couple months ago. And I got a chance to look at the car, and now, because of its age, it's now, you could bring it into this country without any hassles in terms of, well, more than usual hassles in terms of importing the car. So, it's not a bad place to look for cars out of the U.S. market, especially with something like that, because you're not going to spend a ton of money, but you're almost guaranteed to be the only one at the meet. So
yeah, and that car in particular is still a great deal. When you think about what a 924 Carrera GT will cost and what a 968 Club Sport costs, I wish I had a warehouse full of them.
That's great. All right, well, our fourth car on our list that had the highest percentage gain in value, I was kind of encouraged to see, because we kind of go back a little vintage here, the 356C, which is a fantastic car. And I've done a lot of rallies. They're always 356s on rallies. They're never the car that breaks. Everybody's grinning ear to ear all the time they're driving them. So to me, this didn't really surprise me much, other than the fact that everyone is talking about modern cars and this Radwood generation and 80s stuff. And again, I love it that these seem to be moving up. So why these? It's almost like they're bucking the trend a little bit. Why is that?
Well, 356s are interesting because whenever you go to a gathering, a little side note, I'll do a Dave caveat. We should have like a ban where you can only talk about Porsche valuation for like 10% of the time in the Porsche event, because it seemed like it's skewed to half the time people were talking values, and here we are talking values. But it's kind of funny because it seems like the narrative always goes like this. Well, the older generation's going to die off and no one's going to want their cars, right? Everyone heard that before?
Yeah.
And actually, the 356 is interesting because it's sort of not proving that to be the case.
Yeah.
In fact, people call me all the time, well, I'm going to wait 10 years because all those old guys are going to die off and I'm going to get their cars for pennies. You know, it's actually not going to happen because, you know, I have a 356. A bunch of people I know have 356s that are in my generation. I'm a Gen Xer, mid-40s guy. And what's funny is when I drive my car, I'm just as apt to get some 22-year-old hipster with a beard drinking single-source coffee liking my car as I am the typical 70-year-old guy, right?
You do live in Washington State, don't you?
Well, it is funny because, you know, like my dad likes old Ford V8s, right? Like we go out in my dad's old Ford V8, there's nobody who doesn't have a walker and a cane that gives him a thumb up, I kid you not. But I take the 356 out, and like I said, every hipster who still lives in his mom's basement is totally in love with my car. So I think that's the thing with 356s. And you look at the C, those young hipsters, I'll give them one credit because they don't have a job, they're busy driving, and so they want a 356 to drive, and these are the best driving of all the 356s, right?
Yeah, but the deal is you sell them the car, but you have to teach them how to drive a manual transmission.
So yeah, I just think they're eminently usable, they're pretty. And then the other thing that's a change, probably a generational shift, is that it always used to be the open 356s radically outperformed the closed cars. And that gap is closing because there's a whole generation of us who didn't grow up with open cars.
Yeah.
So we don't have that same affinity for an open car that other generations might have had.
Yeah, you grew up post-1975, you know, sort of the great convertible die-off, and it's just not, there's no romantic tug to a convertible. But I agree with Nathan. Porsches are not nostalgia buys. You know, 57 Chevy is a nostalgia buy. If you don't remember Elvis and I Like Ike and poodle skirts and all that stuff, that car's not going to speak to you at all. But 356s, early 911s have this kind of pan-generational appeal. It doesn't matter if you're a 20-something or, you know, 50 or 60, you're going to want that car. I mean, I didn't grow up remembering 356s. You know, I want one. I think the only thing stopping most people younger than us from owning one is, you know, is the price.
Yeah, I mean, you can drive this car in modern traffic too. I mean, that's another thing. You look at a lot of cars from the 50s, and integrating them into traffic nowadays, you probably wouldn't want to do that. But these, yeah, they're great driving cars, like you said.
Yeah. No, I mean, if somebody asked me, you know, $100,000 or less in the Porsche world, you know, what would you want right now? I would take, you know, a 356 SC sunroof coupe in a heartbeat.
Well, with a lot of models of any manufacturer, the rule of thumb is you always want the first one and the last one for collectability. And this is it. This was the end of the line. This was the last of the 356s before they went to the 911 and 912. So I think it's a fascinating bookmark in Porsche history that this was the best they could do with this model at that time.
Yep. No, I think the other thing that we didn't touch on in terms of the appeal to younger people with Porsches and 356s in general is, you know, millennials in particular are, I think, more conscious of experiences and quality. And if you look at the quality of a 356 or an early 911, the way the doors shut, the materials and everything else, even to somebody who's really not a car person, it's obvious that this is really a well-made piece of industrial art. If you look at a solid axle Corvette, if you try to drive one, and you know, it's just it's not the same thing. It's clearly, you know, you are, you know, in something that was built to a price and built not all that well in some cases.
All right, so you can see the curve on this. Now, this was a little bit smaller of a jump, 15.2% up. You know, they've never been cheap. It's not like all of a sudden they've gotten expensive. They've had good value over time. The next one that we're going to show you is another one a little bit like that, because it only goes to 14.9% rise to make our number 5 spot, but the 74 to 77 911. This is one, you guys will agree, for years this was sort of stuck in the middle between the really valuable ones and the ones that other ones they thought were going to be more collectible. Why all of a sudden are these so hot?
Well, I think these are the cars that were, you know, if we look at Porsche, there's always been eras of cars that were out of favor, right? So if we talk 911s, early on it was the short wheelbase cars were out of favor, they're twitchy, they're underdeveloped, and then it was the mid-year cars because everyone's concerned about the 2.7s and some of the issues with those, and then it became the 964, and currently it's the 996. And generally, when you look back, all those things were undeserved. All those cars have wonderful qualities. And I think the thing about mid-years is they lagged for a long, long time. You could buy a decent mid-year for decades in the $10,000 range. And they're just too good of a car. They never should have been that value. And so I think the other thing is that some of the sort of known potential foibles on them, for example, the head studs and the issues with the emission systems on them, a lot of those issues were resolved early in the car's lives, but that legacy lived on. Much in the same way like some of the concerns about IMS bearings and things like that on the M96 era cars. I think that's going to carry for a long time, well after we've actually addressed and dealt with those issues. So I think people are discovering these cars share the driving characteristics of an early car. They're light, they're pure, they have very cool period colors. So a little shameless plug, this is one of my personal cars in a color called Hell Green. I mean, this car stops traffic because of the color, right? Porsche got a little more conservative later as we get into the 80s with the other G-body cars, and they just didn't produce colors like this. So if you like the little narrow hips and the Dayco trim and bright colors and cookie cutters, well, this is your car.
I think we talked a little bit about this too, but that is, I think Brad, it was you that said perhaps the only car that made it through the bumper upgrades that actually came out pretty good the other end.
I don't see anything wrong with that. It's great.
When it became a requirement to have a certain mile per hour impact on the bumper design.
Yeah, no, we just did that article a few months ago in Panorama, and, you know, we said that, you know, it looks like something that Porsche might have done to update the look of the car, irrespective of the bumper requirements. They did that good of a job, and for a small company that had essentially a little over a year's worth of notice to do it, they did a remarkable job. I mean, look at any Mercedes-Benz, look at any BMW, heaven forbid Fiat X19 or something like that from the era, and not everybody else did it that well.
Well, this is interesting too because there was a big increase in value in air-cooled 911s, right, a few years ago. So this curve here, when we just go back to November of 2014, I mean, there was probably a much bigger rise that had already hit before that, because that, again, 15% or 14.9% up, it really doesn't show how much those things have gone up over 5-7 years, right?
Do you think there's any bump? I'm curious, maybe if I could ask a question, but if we look at that in 2015, that was around the anniversary, the 50th anniversary. Do you think those type of celebrations have anything to do with people's interest, or yes or no?
Yeah, it does. It can be a temporary effect, but I call it the top of brain effect. You know, you forget about it, you know, you walk by them, you don't even think of them, you see them at a meet, something like that, then all of a sudden, you know, there's this added factor that's like, whoa, you know, I was 50 years ago, or I was 25 years ago, or whatever, and I think that brings an added focus. It's just like all kinds of, you know, magazine articles or advertising, or, you know, something on maybe Jalopnik or something like that that you read, and then it triggers that, you know, that kind of, that feeling that, you know, I'm missing that, maybe I should look into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the E-Type 50th, the 911 50th, I mean, there certainly was a little bit of a bump there, but I mean, these cars were just too cheap for too long. You know, I mean, the driving experience, Nathan and I were talking about this the other day, is, for at least for 74, for an early 27, is a lot like, you know, a late 24 long hood car. And you've got the bright trim, you've got the bright colors and all those things. And for them to be, you know, basically, you know, $8,000 or $9,000 cars for a long time just made no sense.
The other thing that's interesting about mid-years, because they were inexpensive for so long, at least probably at least a dozen people I know that are kind of really into the Porsche community now. When I asked them what their first Porsche was, 74 to 77 911, and it was simply because it's what they could afford. I bought my first 911 with money I had made buying and selling all the Volkswagens when I was 16 years old. And it was a gray market, which was a curse word back then, 75 911. It was just the base model. No one even remembers they made a base model 911. It was a 75 with rusty doors and broken head studs, but it's what I could afford at 16. And so that's what got my start, right? So I meet a lot of people, they say, man, that was my first car. It was a 75. And everyone talked trash about it, but that was still my favorite car I ever had. So I think there's some of that too.
All right, well, let's move on really quick. We're going to go down and we're going to call this Noteworthy Adjustments. Now, again, this is not the sky is not falling here on Porsche values. I thought this was really interesting when we talk about the top 5 movers in a downward trend from what we saw this past year. We start at 1%, which is arguably flat, depending on what our margin of error is, and we go all the way to 20%. And it couldn't be a more polarizing car to talk about at that final level. So it's going to be interesting to talk about why that number may be what it is. So if we start off here, the 356 Carrera, which we just talked about how great 356s were, and then we get to the one with the most ultimate engine you could ever buy. How the heck did this one go down 1.14% last year? Dave.
I knew it would come to me. That's why I put the microphone down and tried to look innocent. I think one of the things you could say is rich guys play toys. Whereas the 356 has kind of got a lot of do-it-yourself. Carrera engine has no do-it-yourself to the average human being, not just person. I think that once a number of people, they buy them, they like them, and then they decide there's something more they like. And we see that all the time with cars that go up in value especially. And I think that could be part of it. Another is that, let's be honest, a lot of the people who have a big collection of cars like this, they're looking at their final timeline and they're saying, why don't I sell 3 356s and 2 early 911s and buy the biggest, baddest, brand newest Porsche, and I can drive it every single day, and the air conditioning works, it's got Bluetooth, and it has this and that and this and that, and at 78 years old, I'm not the driver I was at 18. So I think a lot of those cars are coming out of collections like that. So we see that happening, more and more. We baby boomers, and I'll speak for the entire generation, we baby boomers are people who thought they'd live forever, but now we're losing more people. And I'm not at the end of the baby boomers, but it becomes real when you look at the amount of cars you've collected and what you're going to leave to my wife's new boyfriend, I guess. So anyhow.
So for something so specialized like this, Ray, you've probably got insight on parts support, factory support for a car that has such a low production run?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, this example of where there is a lot of special knowledge required in parts, and sometimes it requires you to make them. And yeah, absolutely, as everything Dave said, the vehicles are they're not easy to run. I mean, they foul plugs easily. I mean, you need to run them. They're basically race engines that were put in the street, and that's why, like we were talking the other day, why some of these really rare examples, early 60s cabriolet, Carrera 2 cabriolet with all the options, and I mean, it's a race motor in an open top car. I mean, of course, now we look at something like the 918 Spyder, and we've made that work in an everyday situation. Even from the Carrera GT to the 918, there was that usability jump that was made through technology. But back then, it was a very complicated hot rod motor, and it's a sweet motor. There's no question about it. Everything that it does, but without question, it requires expert care and maintenance and upkeep.
And it's sweet to the tune of, what was the number, 200 grand when RM sold that last one?
Just the engine.
Yeah, just the motor, $200,000 engine.
Yeah, any 4-cam car is a car that I call a what's that sound car, where you're driving along and you hear something strange coming from the back and you're like, what's that sound? I mean, it's like, you just get to a point and say, out of hell with it, I'm just going to build a really, hot push-rod engine, put it in the car and drive that car and not, keep worrying about what's that sound.
I think the other thing is the Carrera cars, this will be an interesting change because as the 356 ownership profile shifts over time, you know, for me, I'm buying a 356 more as a nostalgia buy because, again, they weren't commonly driven on the road when I was driving them. So I don't recall the Carrera being the holy grail that it would have been to someone at that time period, because certainly by today's standards, any of the cars we're talking about today would be bested on if you're just doing a spreadsheet for performance by a modern minivan, right? So we're really not buying them for their performance per se. It's about the experience. And so for a person who's buying their first 356, a younger buyer, they'd look at it and say, well, I want one to drive, so a C is really interesting, because nobody owns a 356 Carrera as their only 356. I'll bet you I'd almost place a wager there's not a 356 owner in the world, 356 Carrera owner in the world that's his only 356. I almost guarantee it. This is a kind of a pinnacle in a collection where he's got 5 or 6 other cars, and this is kind of the capstone to his collection, if you will. So you got to wait until that next generation really falls in love with the 356. They're making more money, and then they say, aha, you know, I got to have this holy grail car. But they'll probably have more of a hot rod, Emery Outlaw style car to drive, to flog, and this will just be the one that just, I've got one.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a guy named Greg Blue, and I don't know if you've ever met Greg in any of these circles. He's got a barn find 356 Carrera that I just finished doing great race with him from Riverside, California to Tacoma, Washington. And then we just did the Sports Car Market 1000 from all over Oregon. He drives his barn find Carrera, and he just zooms out in the morning and comes back at night, and it's got silver paint flaking off it, an old Bondo. I think it was on Hawaii, the island of Hawaii for years and years and years. And I haven't seen him put a screwdriver on it yet. So I guess maybe when you get them set, they'll last a while, but he'd be a good one to keep checking up with on what the longevity of these engines is, because he's sure using the heck out of his.
I'll touch base with you after we're done here.
Yeah.
Well, the key is he's actually driving it as he's supposed to drive it. That's the key.
Yeah. Well, all right, well, moving through our list, I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So our next one that dropped a walloping 3.03%, the 66 to 69 912. Obviously, we're leaving the 912E out of it that you guys are familiar with. So this is the vintage 912. So not a terrible slide. And again, I think they had a little bit of a run up, but then it just looks like they're kind of drifting down a little bit now. Why would that be? What do you think?
And I think they're just following the same pattern with long hood 911s, which are not, wouldn't say just a little bit of the air is coming out of the market, and I think that 912s are just sort of following the equivalent long hood 911 in that respect.
Of all the cars we've had up here, this is the one that I would personally put my money in and not worry about too much sliding down the ladder. And Nathan and I have bonded over 912s. We both really, really like the cars for probably all the wrong reasons. But I like these cars. I think they've got a long-term viability. They're so usable, they're so fun, and they're still as tossable as anything you want. And they're competent at the same time. So I just really love the 912s.
Well, there's one for sale on the Mart in Panorama. Oh, sorry, he's hoping to snipe that thing, I guess, right after the meeting. I think Rob uses these seminars to buy cars and parts. What do you guys think? But the point of it is, let's use a different example of a different 912 then. That was very similar to the one we had.
Very similar to the Aga Blue car that's on the Mart now, but not the Aga Blue car that's on the Mart right now.
A different one than the Aga Blue one you can see in Panorama today online. During this meeting on your smartphone, but please don't check it, that I could have bought for 11 grand, the exact car. Like it couldn't have been more than, maybe it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And I said, I don't know, I'll hold out. I want another 911. And I'm the guy you ask me what I just passed up and then go buy 10 of them because I'm terrible at investing in cars, but I have a lot of fun with it. But even to say it's gone down and it's still triple the price, 4 times the price of what it was before. I mean, that's still a pretty interesting car and a lot of performance and excitement for it, right? I mean, they handle great.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you point out, lighter in the back. I had a friend that was a true advocate for the 912 going many, many years back. I mean, probably over 15 years ago. He preferred them over the 911 for that reason. And they are great driving cars, and they're easy to maintain too because they're rather simple cars. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that when Porsche, after the 914 success and was waiting for the launch of the 924, that 1 year that they needed something to sort of fill that space in the model line, they brought the 912 back.
Yeah, 912s are interesting because I think forever the conversation was always people only bought a 912 because they couldn't, quote, afford a 911, and that's actually not true, and it wasn't true when they were new, and it's not necessarily true now. I mean, if you reflect back the sales data in period, the 912 outsold the 911 2 to 1. And that wasn't simply because of the price. So that was some part of it. But if we remember, and this is even before my generation, but I'm the reader and I've talked to a lot of people, I have several friends who are original owners of early 912s, and their thing was, well, they were 356 people. And they thought it was heresy that Porsche was going to put this 6-cylinder engine in a Porsche. I mean, that doesn't belong there, right? I mean, this sounds like a familiar conversation with 718s, right? And so they said, well, in fact, a very good friend of mine is the original owner of a very early VIN 912, and that was his thing. He just said, I was just aghast that they were going to put a flat 6-cylinder motor. That doesn't belong in a Porsche. That sounds just altogether wrong. And he's always felt that way, and it's kind of funny, and there's still that sentiment out there, and I probably am in that camp. I like the feel, particularly the very early, like wood, 3-gauge wood dash style cars, very light. They're revvy. Because again, none of these cars are fast by modern standards, so it's about the experience and how they sound and smell and feel. And an early 912, and you're sliding around a corner at, 30 miles an hour, you feel pretty awesome. You take a new Porsche out, sorry Ray, I know you're with Porsche, but man, anything below a license revocation status, they're not even interested because they're just so capable. One of these cars, man, with a little 165 series tires, it's so much fun.
Well, moving down the list, and still less than a 6% decrease from prior year, 69 to 73 911. So we're really getting into these delineations here between the air-cooled cars on what's popular, what are the functions. I mean, of a 69 to 73, is there any particular reason you think these held up at this level than some of the other ones we've talked about? Again, not much. This year is pretty steady across the board for the past couple of years.
Yeah, I don't know, who doesn't like, a long wheelbase, long hood 911? And there's something to choose from in about every category, TE or S, so to choose your flavor, choose your color. They're really appealing cars. And by the time they got, near the end of that run by 73, they're really well-developed cars at that point. Nathan and I have had this conversation, but I'm a fan of 73.5 CISTs. I mean, I think that, given my choice, and I've owned both, between a 2.4S and a CIST, I would prefer to drive the CIST on a regular basis.
Well, these are, and the look of these long hoods, they're so iconic. And I think to most people that the devil's really in the details in these cars. T's, E's, S's, L's, you name it. There's a little number that means an awful lot to a real Porsche file, right? So within this, and then coupes and Targas, I mean, there's a lot of choices that you can do in here, so.
I think that's another car too, like we were talking earlier about the 356, where you have even young people that, weren't around when that car was the car. But it's eminently cool. I mean, it's always going to be cool. There's something about it that's timeless, which just happens to be the connection they're using with the new 992 introduction, a timeless machine. But there is something about that look, and maybe that's also the point too about the open-top cars versus the coupes. Just that fly line, the look of a 356 coupe, the look of a 911 coupe. These cars all have it. I don't know. It's hard for me to explain why there'd be a drop in something like that. I mean, I don't know.
Again, 5%, this is not a big number.
Yeah, no, not much.
I think the little bit of drop, and my prediction, we'll see a similar drop when we revisit this conversation next year. I think it's really just because they've been such a good product in the market for so long. The pipeline's pretty full of these cars, both in restoration shops and in collection. So these are not hard cars to find. If you go to any of the major auctions, be it Monterey or Scottsdale or Amelia, the #1 car at every one of the major auction houses, that European car, would be 69 to 73 911s. Every sale has 3 to 10 of them.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of them in the market, and I think that's probably what you're seeing. I think the demand is still good, but there's a fair amount of supply.
Yeah. And the thing is, the point that you made, back in 2014, early 2015, it was kind of the height of the market, and you were seeing $100,000 for a T, 150 to 175 for an E, 200 to 300 for an S. That was a giant amount of appreciation in a fairly short period of time, and everybody was concerned about, is this a bubble? When's the bubble going to burst? And the fact is, the bubble didn't burst. You know, some air came out of it slowly, the market did a soft landing, and I think you're going to continue to see a little bit of air come out of the long hood 911 market for a while. But again, the bubble didn't burst. You know, it's sort of healthy, action in the market.
Was that when the Steve McQueen car
The slate gray.
sold, and then it's kind of like from there?
Yeah, and I think that was probably around 2012, 2013, 11
Right
through
on the
13.
beginning.
That's when the big run-up happened in Monterey and Scottsdale, and all of a sudden you were seeing $250,000 and $300,000, 911Ss. Yeah.
Well, this one, guys, breaks my heart. 9%. I had this on the wall in high school. I love this car. This is our friend Mark Green. If you guys ever listen to his podcasts out there, his Cars Yeah. Ray, I think you've been on it.
Yeah, it's great.
I've been on it. Rob, you've been on it. Have we all been on his podcast? Yeah, we've all been on his podcast. That's great. What an icon. These things, I would think these would be $1 million right now.
A lot of the times
No?
what happens
Don't
is
listen to Brad.
when cars go up, the pipeline gets filled, like Rob said. But what also happens is the people who said, I'm not going to sell my car, when it becomes not just paying off the mortgage, but also paying for a new kitchen, then that car automatically or suddenly becomes for sale. And I think there's some of that factor there, because when things go up in value, if you think of an object as being worth $20,000, let's say you have a Rolex watch, and then you take it into the Rolex dealer and he offers you $75,000, that I'm never selling that watch might just change at that point. And that happens with Porsche and with other cars as well. And I think that's part of it. The classic one that happened recently was 190 SL Mercedes. Worthless, pretty much all of my lifetime. And then all of a sudden one sells at an auction for $285,000. And everybody who has one of these things in their restoration shop sitting way in the back goes, oh, wait a minute, I've got like $8,000 in that car and I can restore it for 65 or maybe 100, and of course it's usually 150. But anyhow, they go ahead and restore it because they're going to expect by then they'll be worth $275,000. Boom, 50 of them come on the market, and the market can't absorb 50. And so, not that that's the problem here, it's more that they ran up so much that people who were not going to sell them decided to sell them, and I think that's very normal in this time. I will issue a caveat though. I don't think the market's as strong as many people do right now. I think we're actually heading into a weaker market. The cars that are selling right now are perfect cars. When you talk to 90% of my dealers that I talk to, they say, I can't sell it if it's a 97% car. It has to be 100. And then the caveat to that is barn finds. They can sell them all day long. So go figure, the car that needs $1 million restoration and the car that's worth $1 million are the two that are selling. But anything in between is becoming a tough sale right now. It's a different market than it was in 2014, which we now know was the top of our market in most collectible cars.
Well, that's a great point to make, and our last car is a little different than all the rest. And a surprise, I think, to see a 20% reduction in value in what we've seen over the last year. The 918 Spyder, this is a supercar. This is everything Porsche knows how to throw at it, right? So what's behind this? Is this because there were just so few being sold? One little blip either way changes the scale so much? I mean, why would that show up here?
I mean, I don't know the exact number, but I mean, there were somewhere around 300 that came to the United States, if I recall correctly. And so, I mean, you're right. It is a very small number, and one move can make a big.
Yeah, but I mean, before we start getting at our tiny violins for the 918 Spyder, let's remember that, they're what, like 875 to 900, and even after the giant slide in prices, they're like 1.1 to 1.2 million dollars. So you're still not buying one for what they cost new.
I think the thing about supercars, which this certainly falls in that category, is you have a couple types of buyers in supercars. The kind of buyer who can spend $875 or $1 million for a new car. There's a large chunk of them, I call them the flavor of the month club. Whatever the newest supercar that comes out, that's going to be what's going to be in their garage, and so they're short-term ownership. And so now that this car is 3 and 4 years old, 5 years old, why its performance envelope is unbelievable, time marches on, and we're in a period of time where things are moving very, very quickly in the supercar space. And so now I think there's that natural lull period between the flavor of the month buyer and the long-term buyer who looks at this car and says, in 20 or 30 or 40 years, this car will be the holy grail car, right? And so it's sort of that transition. So I think a couple of them come to market, they've all got to find homes. So my prediction on these cars is they will slide, they'll have their biggest slide in the next 5 years before they'll firm up and then slowly start moving up. That would be my prediction on the cars, but it's worth what you paid to come to this seminar.
As soon as you see Justin Bieber driving one on your daughter's Instagram post, it's time to sell it.
Sadly, Justin can't.
It has reached its end, but it's the flavor of the month car, and it's no longer the flavor of the month car. I mean, we're living in a world. You don't have to like this, but I'm going to say it. Where Corvette just introduced a car that goes from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds for $70,000. That was performance. People would have laughed at you if you would have said that 5 years ago, because it was impossible to do. Performance, performance, performance. It marches on, and so the 2010 supercar is now yesterday's news.
Yeah. Well, we started a little bit late. There's not anybody coming in directly after us. We've got a little bit of a few minutes. I wanted to open up the floor to some questions. Jonathan has a microphone if you'd like to use it so everyone can hear the question, and we'll get our panelists to answer as best we can. Does anybody have a question about either our list or anything just crazy on your mind you just want to get out there? We've got Manny, past president, Porsche Club of America.
I guess this question's for Ray, since he works for Porsche. As a 918 owner, if you're an original 918 owner and you sell your 918 to Nathan, does that put Nathan automatically into that vaulted 918 circle where you get first shot at all these brand new limited edition cars, or is that circle just original owners?
It's original owners. You're talking about the 918 VIP program, and yeah, that was just the original owner of the car.
Do you think that impacts the value of the car because you're losing? That's pretty special to be able to have first shot at these limited run cars.
Yeah, I don't think at this point that affects what they're talking about. I think, Dave, there's been a lot of good things said around it, but no, I don't think that affects it. I think at some point in time, and it's obviously down the road a bit, but that car was developed when it was announced. The technology that was in that car didn't exist, and they had basically 3 years to make it happen, and they did. And at the same time, they also were taking a lot of those learnings. It was happening simultaneously with the 919 hybrid that went on to win 3 Le Mans in a row. And I think when you look back at cars like the 73 RS and the racing history around that, I think at some point in the future, this is just me and my crystal ball kind of thing, I think that you have that tie back to the heritage, which happens a lot in the Porsche world, that always brings things back around. And so, I mean, for the blip that's there now, and if there's any more to come, I think there's some things that will affect it, but the heritage will always come back to it. And then the fact that it's part of the trifecta right now, where you have basically the 959, the Carrera GT, and the 918 Spyder. Somewhere down the road in the future, if there becomes a fourth one, then it's not hard to imagine somebody saying, well, I have to have all 4. And then so you go out searching for this limited number of cars, which all of a sudden then the prices start to come back up. So I mean, it ebbs and flows with anniversaries and new car introductions and other things that happen, and it ties back to heritage. So there's a lot of movement there, but I really don't think that not having that as a second or third owner is impacting the value at all.
Have another question here?
Yeah, and anybody at the floor here would like to take this. In follow-up to that, I guess what I'm asking to that same question is, you talk heritage. Is pedigree and heritage all the same thing? And if so, I mean, you've got a car that's, like 1977 or something like that, and it only has 2 owners. How much do you think that would play in on it? Or are you saying that the pedigree doesn't really have as much of a value as the condition of the car?
I think it matters significantly, but maybe you guys would like to speak a little bit as well.
I'll talk about that. If you guys are around on Friday, I'm giving a tech talk, and that'll be one of the things we talk about is heritage and why that plays in. But it absolutely matters. I mean, people in this room, when we go up and we talk to, we see a gal and she's got a really neat car, we want to talk to her about it. Well, we want to hear the story. That's the first thing we want to know, right? I mean, that's our conversation, right? It's like, oh, and then you find out, oh, she ordered it new, and she took it up European delivery, and she ordered this custom color, and all of a sudden that car is more interesting, right? And it's more valuable in the marketplace. And you could take that same car, and if you didn't know anything about it, but it could be the exact same car in the exact same condition, But there were 5 owners. All of a sudden, it's sort of viewed as, oh, maybe those other 4 owners didn't love it, which I think is not necessarily logical, but we like a good story, and it absolutely plays into it, whether it's a tie back to a racing connection or that, or to the particular owner. I think it matters a lot.
I want to mention a couple of quick things here also as we're winding down. If you want to find out what your car is worth and watch how we track trends and things, you can go to Hagerty.com, valuation tools. And also, if you're interested in being a Hagerty Drivers Club member, this is also how you get a deeper dive into values. You get our magazine and some great discounts with some of our partners. We're very proud to be here with our friends at Porsche Club of America. It's really wonderful to be here. Do we have any more questions out there? We've got a few more. We're going to get the boot. Damon actually is shutting down his live stream also, so this is actually trapped. It's going to be up live on the PCA website in 20 minutes. I'm kidding, no pressure. So if you have more questions, you can actually type them in on the PCA website or the Facebook page, and we can go back and answer them too and get you some more information if you need it. So I know there's a lot of questions. All right, sir.
My question is addressed to a gentleman, particularly on the right, who talked about flavor of the month. And I want to make it more generic with regard to the concept of value. Because I'm a real estate appraiser, which is not a car appraiser, but values go up and down. Have values always gone up and down, not just for cars, but for everything, because of these vagaries that you're discussing now, like, oh, well, you know, it's not the flavor of the month, or there's too many in a pipeline, or that, or like an economist, can we really predict what the future is for any of these cars, or is there any thought going through? I know you make your living off of this, so it's a tough question, so do I. But you ask me, can I predict the future of what houses will be the best? No.
Well, I'm an appraiser as well, I've been a member of American Society of Appraisers since 1991, as a matter of fact, and all I do is automobiles. But yeah, there are indicators, and for houses and for a little bit less for commercial, it's neighborhoods. For cars, you can look at who's buying the cars, what demographics are looking at it, you know, watch the trends and everything else. But you know, I like to tell everybody that I have a crystal ball. It's made by Lucas, and it hasn't worked since 1991. So, you know, you always get surprised, and there's always going to be that car that's surprised. I like to look for the cars that were hated when they were new. I think that's the funniest thing, because you have these cars. There are some exceptions that are still hated, don't get me wrong, but you know, the experts all go, oh, it's the worst thing ever, it's going to be the worst car that they've ever made, you know, whatever. Watch for that one, because at some point it will become not iconic first, it might become kind of sarcastic at first, and then a lot of the times it grows and grows and grows. I mean, here's a prediction for you. It won't be much more than a year or two from now when we're talking about Porsche SUVs and values for the early SUVs. That's a trend that's grown for pickup trucks and cars and everything else. And there will be people who remember growing up in the backseat of an early Porsche SUV. And so, you know, I mean, the point we made earlier about the 914, you know, it was a car that there were people would just want to forget. And now it's like, what an important stepping stone in the history of Porsche. So it's very, very hard to predict the future, I get that, but a lot of times you can follow the trends and see who is buying it, what the demographics are, and watch the values over time. Like I said though before, I can't emphasize enough, just like you don't want to buy the house because it's going to only appreciate, you want to buy the house because you like it. So, you know, this is icing on the cake.
Got it. I think we've got probably time for maybe 2 more, and then the rest of the panelists will be here. Maybe we can take it offline. We can have a quick chat.
Talk about things that were hated when they're new. What's the status on 996s and the hated headlights?
You can't see the headlights when you're driving.
Yeah, nobody ever complained about it on a GT1 either. You know, honestly, I think that conversation, thankfully, is starting to fade into the past as people realize what a great car the 996 is. It's another car that was kind of a savior car for Porsche. you know, I don't know. I think as Porsche people, we love to have, you know, something to needle and something to pick on. But they're great cars, and I think that we've all had this conversation, that 996 prices are firming up. I mean, the cars that you used to be able to buy for $16,000 and $17,000 are now $20,000 and $21,000. And, you know, the same is starting to probably happen for 986 Boxsters. So forget about the headlights, you know, and enjoy the car.
We've talked about this individually with several of you. What's the event horizon for the sports car becoming the horse? It has no practical value whatsoever. You can't go get ice cream in it, and they're only stabled and ridden on Sundays.
I have a question
We've done
for you.
whole seminars on this one.
I have a question for you. Do you own a vacuum cleaner? Okay. Do you own a broom? Do you own a broom? Brooms replace vacuum cleaners. Why do we still have brooms? I don't think it's going to happen as fast as everybody thinks it's going to happen. I know that, you know, between legislation and environmental concerns and everything else, we're going to be losing the internal combustion engine, and it's going to take some time, and we're going to transition into electric cars. But I'm not worried about autonomous vehicles. I will make the prediction right now that they're 10 years behind the 10-year timeline that they're talking about right now. There's too many variables. So I don't think the end of the driving experience is over. As a matter of fact, I think we're living through the absolute renaissance of the automobile today.
I
agree with that, and I think for everybody in this room, we're okay. We bring our surfboard to the shore. I told my daughter that in her lifetime, in my mind, she will not be able to obviously be in the car. I believe that's true. So we're okay.
Well, I've got to say from my standpoint, I mean, this is what I was talking about this morning. From Porsche perspective, I mean, we have the pure combustion engines, we have the sporty hybrids, and we have the electric coming. And so this is why Porsche Classic and the whole topic of what we're doing and the work around that is becoming important, because there is the coming of the electric mobility, and we're on board with that. That's happening. And at the same time, though, we're not losing sight of the heritage in the internal combustion engine. So we're keeping these cars going. It's going to be a long time with the way we do the maintenance and the reproduction of the parts to keep these cars going, because it's 10 years after they're out of production. There's a long way to go yet with internal combustion, as you said, and maybe classic's not the right word to use. Maybe it's more of a heritage word, but that is what internal combustion is, and there's still development work coming in that, and there's still a lot going on. But the passion for driving that and enjoying that's what Porsche Classic is all about. And so even as a split starts to come with that, you know, we're there. It's not going away.
All right, we got time for one more, and if you just yell, you just do it fast.
Why do you think, in the era of the original air-cooled Targas, they were extremely well-respected cars, and everybody sort of liked them, wanted them, bought them, and all of a sudden we seem to see that the Targas are not respected. Why do you gentlemen think that's happening?
I'll speak to that. Well, a couple things. So basically, if we talk air-cooled 911 specifically, right, we had 3 configurations available over its lifetime: coupes, Targas, and cabriolets. Cabriolet debuting in 1983. In the marketplace, or when they were new, the coupe was the least expensive variant, followed by the Targa, then the cabriolet. And in today's market, they followed that exact opposite. So first off, I wouldn't say that they aren't respected. I would say that they trade at a lower value. So I don't think it's a respect issue. I think they trade at a lower value, and it goes in that fashion. Coupes trade at a premium to a Targa, but trades at a very slight premium to a cabriolet. But there are some differences. You know, for example, in short wheelbase cars, they trade very similar. And of course, if you get a soft window Targa, that's a very valuable car. And I think that gap is closing, but not at a rapid pace. I mean, right now it's about a 20% variance between coupe and Targa or cabriolet. I think what it comes down to is a couple things. One, I think the aesthetic of the coupe is the traditional design language of the car. Doesn't mean the Targa's bad. I own several Targas. I think they're great. But I think there's a general preference in the market for the traditional aesthetic of the coupe. I think the other thing that's unique with 911 is that people are still driving and utilizing these cars. And so if you're an enthusiastic driver, many people perceive, true or not, that a coupe is a more pure expression of that. They're more rigid, less likely for wind leaks, things like that. So some of it comes down to that piece. You know, if I were investing in them, which as Dave says, I don't believe in investing in cars, I think the best buys in the market right now, particularly impact bumper Targas and Cabriolets, because again, they're bought at a discount and they're every bit as good a car. So I mean, I hope that answers the question.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Rae, Nathan, Dave, Rob, you guys did an outstanding job. We hope to be standing before you next year and talking about what we got right, what the new trends are, and where we are on things. So thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.